They built 135 luxury homes on my family's land without permission, then tried to evict me from my own property. You've got to see this to believe it. One lone farmhouse completely swallowed by 135 identical McMansions like my grandfather's legacy got mugged by a suburban nightmare. I'm Ezra Blackwood, and the woman stomping across my yard with a sheriff's deputy actually thinks she can steal 4 generations of my family sweat and call it progress. Veronica Ashcraft-Toff slides out of her pristine white Tesla designer heels, immediately sinking into farm mud with that perfect squelching sound of karma. The acrid stench of wet concrete from her illegal development battles the sweet honeysuckle my late wife planted. She waves an eviction notice at me like I'm some squatter on my own damn land. This is a family neighborhood now, she announces with corporate smugness, not some rural eyesore. Thunder crashes overhead as my weathered hand grips the brass dam lever, worn smooth by my grandfather's faithful touch. What would you do if someone stole your family's legacy and called you the problem? Where are you watching from? Let me back up and explain how a peaceful cattle ranch became ground zero for the most brazen land theft in county history. I'm Ezra Blackwood, 4th-generation rancher on 847 acres my great-grandfather Tobias homesteaded in 1889. This isn't just property. It's American legacy written in weathered fence posts, hangdog wells, and the massive oak tree, planted by a man who believed hard work and honest dealing would build something lasting. For generations of Blackwoods have proven him right until now. The ranch sits on a natural watershed fed by underground springs that bubble up, crystal clear year-round. You can taste the minerals in that water, clean and sweet like nature intended. So pure my late wife Sarah used to joke it could cure anything except a broken heart. My grandfather built a small earth dam in 1962, capturing spring runoff in a reservoir that feeds the creek winding through our entire valley. Sarah understood this land better than anyone. She wasn't just my wife for 26 years. She was an environmental scientist with a PhD who wrote her master's thesis on our exact watershed. Her research documented seasonal flood patterns, wildlife habitats, and the delicate balance that makes this ecosystem work. Losing her to cancer 18 months ago broke something in me that $127,000 in medical bills didn't help fix. Our daughter Emma calls from Seattle every Sunday, begging me to sell and move closer. Dad, it's just land, she says, not understanding this ranch represents 4 generations of dreams, Sarah's life's work, and Emma's inheritance, whether she wants it or not. Everything changed 2 years ago when neighboring rancher Jim Johnson died. His kids couldn't wait to cash out, selling 640 prime acres to Pinnacle Development Corporation for $3.2 million. These corporate vultures immediately offered me $2.1 million, probably figuring a grieving widow rower would take easy money and disappear. They figured dead wrong. When I politely told them my land wasn't for sale, not today or ever, things escalated fast. Within 3 months, their surveyor had accidentally moved boundary markers 200 feet onto my property. By the time I caught the fraud, construction crews were breaking ground on Ashcraft-Toft Estates, 135 luxury homes starting at $485,000 each. Here's the criminal part. They built their community center, playground, and main entrance road entirely on my land using water from my springs without asking permission or paying a dime. The brass-bladed audacity was almost impressive. Steal a man's property while building on it, then charge $500,000 per house for the privilege. But the real insult came driving up my driveway in a white Tesla with blessed 1 vanity plates. Meet Veronica Ashcraft-Toft, former corporate lawyer turned HOA dictator married to City Councilman Bradley Ashcraft-Toft. This woman makes entitled Karens look humble by comparison. Our first meeting happened while I was repairing fence damaged by their construction trucks. She showed up wearing white designer jeans to a working ranch, stepping carefully around honest mud like it might contaminate her. The sweet scent of Sarah's honeysuckle garden clashed with Veronica's suffocating perfume, something that smelled like artificial flowers drowning in chemical vanilla. She handed me a thick packet of HOA bylaws I'd never agreed to join, then delivered the line that still makes my blood boil. Mr. Blackwood, this development requires aesthetic consistency. Your rustic approach simply doesn't align with our community standards. I stood there holding fence pliers, staring at this woman on land my family had owned for 134 years, telling me my grandfather's barn violated her standards. Even my rooster Edgar seemed personally insulted. He studied over and started attacking her designer purse like it had committed a crime against nature. Ma'am, I replied, fighting back laughter. My family's been setting the standard here since before your community was a pipe dream in some developer's head. Her corporate smile could have frozen hell over. Well, that's exactly the problem we're here to solve. That night, sitting on the porch where Sarah and I planned our future, listening to coyotes call across pastures where my cattle grazed peacefully, I realized this wasn't just about property lines anymore. This was war, and they'd just fired the first shot. The morning after Veronica's little inspection tour, my mailbox exploded like a legal grenade factory. 47 separate violation notices, each more absurd than the last. Livestock odor on a cattle ranch. Unsightly agricultural structures. Apparently, my grandfather's 60-year-old barn offended modern sensibilities. Property value. Depreciation through incompatible land use. My personal favorite, fence height violations, creating visual barriers to community cohesion. Sarah used to say some people could find fault with a rainbow if it wasn't color coordinated with their living room. She would have loved this circus. County Inspector Randy Kowalski arrived at dawn looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. Poor guy spent 3 hours photographing every nail and board while Edgar conducted his own inspection, pecking at Ree's clipboard whenever the measurements seemed particularly ridiculous. Mrs. Ashcraft-Toft wants documentation down to the 1/4 in, Randy explained, wiping nervous sweat despite the cool morning. The aquariid smell of his diesel truck mixed with coffee brewing in my kitchen as he measured fence posts with scientific precision. 32 complaints in 1 week. Lady's got dedication. I'll give her that. Each violation carried $500 daily fines starting immediately. Simple math. $23,500 per day unless I magically transformed a working ranch into suburban paradise. Overnight. At that rate, bankruptcy would arrive faster than winter. Time for professional warfare. Marcus Webb looked like he could arm wrestle a bulldozer and win. This ex-Marine turned property attorney spread survey maps across my kitchen table like battle plans, and within 2 hours started grinning like Edgar discovering an unguarded feed bucket. Ezra, they didn't just screw up, Marcus announced, pointing to overlapping boundary lines. They committed federal crimes. No environmental studies, no wetland permits, and they've been stealing your spring water without legal authority for 2 solid years. Marcus taught me something that should be common knowledge, but isn't prescriptive easement. When your family uses land continuously for over 20 years, you can gain legal ownership through use alone, regardless of who holds the paper deed. My family had worked that disputed strip for 134 years, creating ownership rights that trumped any surveyor's creative math. Sometimes persistence really does beat paperwork. But here's where the day got interesting. Our property survey using ground-penetrating radar revealed my grandfather's original concrete boundary markers from 1962 buried directly under Veronica's Community Center foundation. They built their entire social headquarters on your land, Marcus explained, studying the radar images with obvious delight. Every HOA meeting is criminal trespassing and destroying survey markers is a felony. The mini twist. Within hours of discovering this evidence, we filed an emergency injunction to halt all HOA activities on my property. But Veronica struck back, faster than a rattlesnake. By 5 p.m. that same day, she'd convinced the county to red tag my barn as structurally unsafe, forcing me to evacuate my cattle immediately or face criminal charges. My counterpunch, Marcus, and I drove straight to the county courthouse with our survey evidence. 20 minutes before closing time, we filed a federal lawsuit for civil rights violations, water theft, and criminal conspiracy. More importantly, we demanded immediate seizure of all HOA financial records under federal racketeering statutes. Suddenly, Veronica's emergency barn inspection didn't seem quite so clever. The retaliation escalated immediately. Every HOA resident developed selective blindness whenever I appeared in town. Anonymous calls flooded animal control. About my dangerous livestock. Edgar was apparently terrorizing joggers by existing within sight of their precious jogging path. My mailbox became graffiti central, decorated with helpful suggestions like sell out and move on. And wrong neighborhood cowboy. The irony was perfect. My family had built this community since 1889. But these California transplants considered me the unwelcome intruder. The harassment turned vicious when I found fresh tire tracks carved through my best pasture and a young calf dead from deliberately cut fence wire. The metallic smell of blood on sweet grass hit me like a physical blow. Proof that Veronica's war had moved beyond legal documents into actual violence. That night, sitting on the porch where Sarah and I used to dream about our future, I called Emma. While fireflies danced over her mother's grave and lights from 135 illegal houses glowed like accusations in the darkness. Dad, you sound like you're carrying the world, Emma said, worry making her voice exactly like her mother's. Maybe it's time to cut your losses. I'm not just defending our land anymore. Sweetheart, I replied, watching shadows move across the valley where 4 generations of Blackwoods had worked and hoped. I'm proving that ordinary people can still win when they stand up for what's right. After a pause filled with 2,000 m of love and understanding, Emma whispered, then win, Dad. But don't you dare fight alone. That's when I realized this battle wasn't about property lines anymore. It was about whether truth and determination could still triumph over money and corruption in modern America. The real war was just beginning. 3 days after our federal lawsuit hit the courthouse, Veronica launched her counterattack with the subtlety of a freight train loaded with entitlement. She called an emergency community safety meeting at the HOA clubhouse. Ironically, the same building sitting illegally on my stolen land. The woman was using my own property to organize a lynch mob against me. You had to admire the brass-plated audacity. By Saturday afternoon, 89 homeowners had packed into that clubhouse like they were planning D-Day. I could hear their voices from my front porch carrying across the valley with the kind of righteous fury that only comes from people convinced their property values are under attack. The smell of afternoon barbecues mixed with car exhaust as families arrived for what Veronica had built as protecting our children's future. Through binoculars, I watched her clicking through a PowerPoint presentation titled Agricultural Intrusion, the Hidden Threat to Family Safety. She actually used photos of my cattle as evidence of disease vectors, my barn as a structural eyesore, and poor Edgar as an aggressive wildlife attractant. According to her calculations, my existence was costing each homeowner $72,000 in lost equity. Sarah would have laughed herself sick. She used to say some people could find a conspiracy in a church potluck if the potato salad wasn't organized alphabetically. The antagonist's move. Veronica presented a petition to the City Council demanding immediate agricultural rezoning restrictions and emergency eminent domain proceedings. She claimed my livestock posed health risks, my operations attracted dangerous predators, and my nonconforming structures violated new safety codes she'd helped write. My counterpunch Marcus and I crashed that meeting, uninvited, carrying Sarah's original 1994 environmental research and a briefcase full of federal documents that would ruin Veronica's day. The room went silent like someone had announced an IRS audit. Veronica's face cycled through surprise, rage, and what could only be described as existential panic. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced, my voice cutting through the sudden quiet. Since you're meeting on my property without permission, I thought I should introduce myself properly. I'm Ezra Blackwood, and my family has been protecting this watershed since 1889. Marcus spread Sarah's research across Veronica's presentation table like he was dealing winning cards. Before we discuss property values, maybe we should talk about why this entire development violated federal law from day one. The revelation hit that room like a bucket of ice water. Most residents had no idea they'd bought homes in a federally protected flood zone. Sarah's research had documented seasonal water patterns that made residential construction not just inadvisable, but illegal under Clean Water Act protections. During her graduate studies, Sarah had learned something that proved crucial. Now, Developers often hide environmental problems by burying inconvenient research in bureaucratic filing systems, where nobody looks. But when projects receive federal conservation grants, hiding that research becomes criminal. Fraud. Here's where the story gets really interesting. Marcus had discovered that Pinnacle Development received $3.2 million in federal rural development grants specifically designated for agricultural heritage, preservation, and watershed protection. They'd literally stolen taxpayer money meant to protect farmland, then used it to destroy the exact ecosystem they were supposed to conserve. Mrs. Ashcraftoft, Marcus announced to the stunned crowd, your developer didn't just break building codes. They committed federal grant fraud by using conservation funds to destroy protected wetlands, then covered it up by hiding environmental impact studies. Veronica's response dripped with corporate desperation. The important thing is moving forward with community stability, not getting bogged down in bureaucratic technicalities. That's when the room turned against her. Helen Morse, a retired environmental science teacher, stood up in the back. Are you seriously telling us we've been harassing the man whose dam has been preventing our basements from flooding for 60 years? Bob Patterson, a grizzled engineer, shook his head in disgust. I wondered why our insurance was so damn expensive. We're sitting in a natural floodplain, aren't we? Young Father Mike Torres looked genuinely panicked. Veronica, did you know about these environmental violations when you approved our construction permits? Amy Chun, a civil engineer, was already pulling up watershed maps on her phone. If that dam failed during heavy rain, how long before water reaches our foundations? The fear in that room became tangible, mixing with the scent of Veronica's increasingly frantic perfume reapplication as her carefully constructed narrative crumbled faster than a levee in hurricane season. 3. Homeowners approached me quietly after the meeting. Helen, Army Corps veteran Jack Castellanos, and Amy. They were exhausted by Veronica's tyrannical rule, but had been afraid to resist individually. She fined my neighbor $300 for hanging laundry outside, Helen whispered, because it looked economically disadvantaged. Jack's jaw tightened. Woman tried to ban American flags for being aesthetically inconsistent. That's when I knew we had a dictator problem. As we walked toward my truck, heated arguments erupted from the clubhouse behind us. Veronica's perfect community was fracturing, and the cracks were spreading faster than water through compromised foundations. My phone buzzed with a text from my insurance company. Policy canceled due to agricultural liability in residential zone. The war was escalating, but now I had allies who understood what we were really fighting for. Veronica's community meeting disaster taught her that public forums only work when you control the narrative. So, she decided to hit me where widow ranchers are most vulnerable, straight in the wallet. The woman had been digging through public records like a forensic accountant with a personal vendetta. Somehow she discovered Sarah's medical bills, $127,000 in cancer treatment debt that still woke me up at 3 a.m. calculating payment schedules. The metallic taste of panic filled my mouth when I realized how exposed that made me. On a gray Tuesday that smelled like approaching rain and bad news, a process server arrived with legal documents thick enough to insulate a barn. Pinnacle Development was filing mechanics' liens against my property for $89,000, claiming their construction crews had improved drainage systems that benefited my ranch. The audacity was mind-blowing. They'd stolen my land, built on it illegally, then tried to bill me for watching them commit federal crimes. Marcus arrived within an hour, read the liens, and started laughing like Edgar discovering an unguarded feed. Bucket. Ezra, they just committed legal suicide. You can't bill someone for unrequested work on their own property. It's extortion wearing a business suit. He explained something called quantum meruit, a legal principle that protects property owners from exactly this kind of scam. It's like a plumber breaking into your house, replacing perfectly good pipes you never asked him to touch, then demanding payment for improvements you didn't want. Courts absolutely hate contractors who pull this nonsense, especially when it involves stolen property. Within days, Veronica launched a coordinated financial assault from multiple directions. State environmental officials suddenly needed to investigate cattle waste runoff based on anonymous complaints. Child Protective Services received reports about unsafe rural environments despite me having no minor children. My property taxes jumped 340%. Overnight, when the county mysteriously reclassified my agricultural land as development-ready commercial property. But her desperation created the opening Marcus had been waiting for. He filed for emergency court order discovery of all HOA financial records. And what we found was better than Christmas morning. Veronica's landscaping company, Ashcraft Garden Designs, had received $400,000 in no-bid contracts over 2 years. She'd been paying herself with homeowner fees to install overpriced decorative plants and aesthetic improvements that nobody had voted to approve. Self-dealing violations opened the entire HOA board to personal bankruptcy through liability lawsuits. The real smoking gun was buried in city council minutes. Bradley Ashcraft owned 12% of Pinnacle Development Corporation. The man voting on zoning permits was financially invested in the company receiving those permits. Even small-town corruption usually tries to hide the paper trail better than that. The stress tsunami hit me during routine evening feeding when crushing chest pain dropped me to my knees in the middle of the pasture. The smell of fresh hay mixed with my own fierce sweat as I crawled toward the fence, gasping like a landed fish while my cattle watched with bovine concern. 20 minutes later, paramedics were loading me into an ambulance that rare of disinfectant and other people's emergencies. Mr. Blackwood, stress is literally killing you, Dr. Patricia Ross explained in the ER, her voice cutting through medication fog with professional urgency. Your blood pressure could power Christmas lights. Whatever war you're fighting, it's not worth dying over. Emma caught the first flight from Seattle, arriving at my bedside looking exactly like Sarah when she got terrible news. Determined, terrified, and ready to manage everyone within shouting distance. Dad, this is completely insane, she said, gripping my hand while heart monitors beeped reassuringly nearby. It's just land. Mom wouldn't want you literally dying to defend grass and cattle. The foredrip made everything fuzzy around the edges. But my conviction remained crystal clear. It's not just land, sweetheart. It's proof that honest people can still build something lasting in a world that increasingly rewards corruption over character. Emma's eyes filled with tears. That broke my heart because they looked exactly like her mother's. Then let me help you fight, but promise me you won't carry this burden alone anymore. That night, while organizing Sarah's research papers for potential estate planning, I discovered her master's thesis buried in a cardboard box of academic work, watershed management, and flood control. In rural communities, a case study of Millfield County drainage systems. The cover page made me sit upright despite exhaustion. Her research had focused specifically on our property, the dam, underground springs, and downstream flow patterns that controlled water movement throughout the entire valley. But her handwritten margin note stopped my heart completely. Natural floodplain extends 2.3 miles downstream during 50-year precipitation events. Current development proposals ignore critical drainage patterns and would create catastrophic flooding during major storm systems. Sarah had predicted this environmental disaster 28 years ago, and her research contained detailed calculations showing exactly how much water would flow where when nature decided to reclaim its floodplain. My brilliant wife hadn't just studied this watershed. She'd handed me the blueprint for Veronica's inevitable destruction. Thunder rumbled across the valley like Sarah's voice whispering from the grave. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let nature take its course. Reading Sarah's thesis at 2 a.m. felt like receiving a love letter from beyond the grave, except this ghost came armed with 28 years of environmental science and enough legal ammunition to level a corrupt development. The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but I couldn't stop turning pages. Sarah's research was meticulous, brilliant, and absolutely devastating to everyone who had been tormenting me. The smell of old paper mixed with the lingering scent of her perfume that somehow still clung to these documents after all these years. Every page revealed another environmental protection law that Pinnacle Development had violated. Sarah had documented seasonal water flows, wildlife migration patterns, and soil composition with the precision of a scientist who knew her work might someday matter to someone she loved. But page 47 stopped my heart. Federal wetland designation maps. The entire HOA Development sat in a federally protected flood zone that had been deliberately excluded from impact studies. Those 135 luxury homes weren't just built illegally. They were built in an area that nature reclaims every 15 to 20 years during major storms. My grandfather's dam hadn't just been managing agricultural water for 61 years. It had been preventing catastrophic flooding that would have made residential development impossible. The irony was so perfect it made me laugh out loud, probably disturbing Edgar's beauty sleep in the nearby coop. Sarah's calculations were terrifyingly precise. During a 50-year rain event, the kind that hits every couple decades, natural flood patterns would put 3 feet of standing water throughout the entire development. The underground springs feeding my ranch were part of a massive aquifer system that, when saturated, transformed the valley floor into temporary wetlands, exactly like nature intended. While Veronica had been calling my ranch an eyesore, my family had been providing free flood control services worth millions of dollars. Here's where Sarah's environmental genius really showed. She'd researched something called riparian rights, water law that gives upstream property owners absolute control over natural water flow. As long as I used water for legitimate agricultural purposes, I could alter, redirect, or release it however I deemed necessary. Downstream property owners had exactly zero legal claim to flood protection they'd never contracted for or paid to receive. I called Marcus at midnight, probably giving the poor man a heart attack. "Ezra, do you understand what you're telling me?" His voice carried the excitement of a lawyer who'd just found the legal equivalent of buried treasure. "Your wife documented federal crimes that haven't been prosecuted yet. Every homeowner bought property based on fraudulent environmental disclosure. Their insurance policies are void if they weren't properly informed about flood zone status." The legal implications made my head spin. Pinnacle Development had knowingly sold homes in a flood zone without disclosure, violating federal truth and lending laws. The HOA had been collecting drainage fees for flood management they weren't legally providing. Veronica had been finding me for agricultural activities that were not only legal, but essential for preventing the natural disasters that would destroy her precious community. But Sarah's final recommendation, written in her careful scientist's handwriting, gave me the moral framework I needed. Long-term residential development in this watershed requires permanent upstream flood control infrastructure maintained by agricultural operations. Elimination of agricultural use would result in catastrophic property damage during normal precipitation cycles. My brilliant wife had written the environmental protection plan that justified everything I was about to do. I sat at the kitchen table where 4 generations of Blackwoods had made hard decisions, surrounded by Sarah's life's work and the distant rumble of thunder. Her wedding photo smiled at me from the windowsill, and I swear I could hear her voice whispering, "Nature always corrects human mistakes, Ezra. Sometimes we just need to stop preventing the lesson." The Weather Service had issued a severe storm watch for the coming weekend. First major precipitation event in 3 years. Time to let nature be the teacher. My wife always knew it could be. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting in my kitchen, the same room where my grandfather had planned cattle drives and my father had survived the Dust Bowl. The smell of fresh coffee, mixed with decades of honest conversation as I prepared to plan something that would make both ancestors proud, letting nature reclaim what was always hers. Helen Morse arrived first, carrying coffee strong enough to resurrect the dead and 60 years of environmental science wisdom. When I showed her Sarah's research, her face lit up like Christmas morning. "Your wife was absolutely brilliant," Helen whispered, studying watershed maps with the reverence of someone who understood genius when she saw it. "This methodology is textbook perfect. I'd stake my teaching reputation on these calculations." Helen's motivation ran deeper than scientific appreciation. Veronica had fined her $400 for planting native wildflowers that allegedly violated aesthetic consistency standards. For a woman who'd spent her career teaching environmental conservation, the irony burned like acid. Jack Castellanos rumbled up in his pickup truck that sounded like it had survived Normandy and possibly the Civil War. The Army Corps veteran studied Sarah's dam specifications with the kind of professional respect usually reserved for military monuments. "Your Grandfather built this structure, right? Jack announced, running callous fingers along technical drawings. Army Corps couldn't have engineered better flood control in 1962. These brass valves can handle controlled releases. That would make Mother Nature herself jealous. Jack's grudge against Veronica was personal, too. She tried to ban his American flag display for being militaristically inconsistent with community harmony. For a man who'd spent 20 years defending democracy, that crossed every line that mattered. Amy Chin arrived with her laptop, 3 legal pads, and the caffeinated desperation of a working mother fighting suburban tyranny while raising twin toddlers. Within minutes, she was running drainage calculations that confirmed Sarah's predictions with terrifying mathematical precision. If natural flood patterns resume, Amy explained, fingers dancing across her keyboard, water reaches foundation level within 48 hours. Not dangerous flash flooding, just persistent property-damaging saturation that makes homes uninhabitable until natural drainage occurs. Amy's personal motivation was simple. Veronica had threatened to fine her for letting her 3-year-old draw with sidewalk chalk, claiming it created unsightly pavement markings inconsistent with property values. Marcus Webb completed our war council, bringing federal statutes and the prosecutorial enthusiasm of someone who'd found the legal equivalent of buried treasure. The taste of victory was already sweet on his tongue as he spread documents across my table. Here's our legal framework, Marcus announced with obvious satisfaction. Clean Water Act violations, fraudulent environmental disclosure, and duty to warn. Requirements. When property sellers hide known flood risks, they face personal liability for every dollar of damage. Our strategy's beauty lay in its simplicity. We weren't breaking laws. We were enforcing